Hi there. We've been doing a little series called Evidence for God, and so far there have been 4 talks in that series, and you'll find them on our church YouTube channel. I want to continue today under that banner, under the Evidence for God banner, but with a little subset, if you like, that's going to be 3 talks on the subject of suffering. So it comes under that banner of evidence for God because, suffering is perhaps the strongest piece of evidence for no God. And so it's an issue that Christians have got to answer and have got to look at very, very genuinely. So it comes under that banner, but there's more to say on suffering than I can do in one little session, while in fact even 3 short talks will only touch the surface. So this is going to be a little bit of thinking out loud, a few pointers, a few signposts. I'm not going to give or be able to give a thorough analysis of every aspect of suffering, but I just want to sort of throw up a few things for us to think about. And so in this first session I just want to do one very simple thing, which is think about the actual question itself and the challenge itself. So the challenge comes really in some form like this, that says, how can there be a God when there is so much evil and suffering in our world? And at first sight it's a fair question, but what I want to say before we even make any attempt to answer it is that I actually have a fundamental philosophical problem with the question. So you can ask, how can there be a God when there's so much evil in the world? To which I need to ask back, how can you define evil, or even have a problem with evil, if there is no God? If there is no God, then there is no moral law, there is no good or bad distinction, and therefore there is no such thing as evil. So, whilst I might agree with you that having a world in which there is evil and God is difficult to put together, and we'll look at that in the next few sessions, what I also want to say is that having a view which says there is evil in the world and there's no God is just as contradictory. You cannot have evil or define evil without a God and a moral law to define that. And Richard Dawkins, the well-known atheist, actually makes that point. He says in a world explained by evolutionary biology and by the forces of randomness and chance, there is no evil. You cannot define evil. Obviously he says there is no God, but he's quite prepared to say, because he understands the logic of it, that there is no evil either. If you want to be an atheist, you have to say there is no evil. You have to say that Auschwitz was not evil, that the genocide in Cambodia, in Stalin's Russia, in Mao's China, that all those things were not in any way evil. Because if you want to take the atheist view, there can be no definition of evil. So whilst on the one hand it might be difficult, and as I say we'll look at it next time, to hold together the existence of God and the existence of evil, we'll look at that. It is equally problematic to accept that there is evil in the world, but not accept that there's a God. That doesn't work. If you're going to rub out God, you've got to take a view of the world, a radical view along with Dawkins, that actually says, no, there is no evil. And to those of you prepared to do that, I have to ask you to imagine if I were to in front of you. Let's pick something extreme. Forgive me, but let's say torture a child. Are you really going to say to me, that's fine? That's not wrong or bad or evil? Because in a world with no God, if you want there to be a world with no God, then logically that is the case. And yet if there is something within you that is distressed by that wants to say no, that action is fundamentally wrong, is bad, is evil. And I hope there is that feeling within you, because it is. But if that feeling stirs within us, then I have to ask, from whence does it come? If there is no moral law, if there is no absolute definition of right and wrong, then why do you feel it's wrong for me to do that to a child? Why do we turn in revulsion from the stories of Auschwitz? So the argument that says there's all this evil in the world, therefore there cannot be a God, is inconsistent. It's unfair. Either there's no God and there's no evil, or there is a God and there is evil, and we've got to find a way to put the two together. What is not possible is that you say that there is evil and you believe that there is evil, and then you use that to argue that there is no God. That's a logically inconsistent position. I think if we're honest, we know within ourselves what is evil when we see it. And therefore that revulsion in itself is a pointer to the reality of the fact that there is a moral law, that there is a standard, that there is a definition of good and evil, and that if there is that, then there has to be a God who put that in place. We'll look next time at how we might hold those two things together then. That if yes, there is evil in this world, there is suffering in this world, and if yes, we are to conclude there is a God, I agree there's some work to do in how we might hold those two things together. But what you mustn't do is just, without thought, allow an argument from evil to allow you to dismiss the existence of God. Because there's a logical contradiction buried within that argument. And that's just what I wanted to expose and think about in this first session. So next time we'll come back to that question of, well, can we find a worldview that holds within it in some sort of consistent way both the reality of evil and suffering and the reality of God? Because Christianity and the Bible does assert both those two truths. There are some religions, Buddhism is an example, which in a sense seeks to play down the existence of suffering and evil. Really, those things are only our perception, so the argument goes. They're not really real. Christianity doesn't take that view. The Bible is absolutely gritty, down-to-earth, realistic. Evil is real. Suffering is real. There's no attempt in Christianity to deny that at all, or to cover it up or to hide it. Evil is real. And yet, of course, the Christian faith also exerts the existence of a God. And not just a God, but a God who is good and loving. So we've got, yes, I agree, some hard work to do if we're going to hold those two things together in the same worldview. But yes, equally, you cannot say on the one hand, there is evil, therefore there is no God. The bottom just falls logically out of that argument. if you want to go to Dawkins' extreme and say there is no God and there is no evil, then that's a logical option. But I think most of us, in our hearts, when we see terrible things, recognise that that's not actually an option at all. So next time we'll come back and we'll see how we can hold together the idea of a God who is good and the reality of suffering and evil in our world. See you next time.
I fill my life with things that take my eyes off you and all you call me to. Live just to please myself.